The meeting has been posted. The time is 7:25. Continue with the roll call. Jim Olson.
Here.
Kim Smith here. Dan Stevens.
Here.
Item 2, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
I move we accept the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
Motion by Dan, seconded by Jim Olson to approve the minutes from the meeting. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 3 is public input. If there are any individuals that would like to address the committee, please come forward and give your input now. Would anybody like to address the committee? Last chance. Not seeing anyone who would like to address the committee, we'll move on to the finance. Consideration and possible action on item 4, the 2019 Omni Center financials. Fred?
Okay, in your packet of information, on page 2, you'll see we had revenues of $512,506 compared to $521,679 in expenditures, and that is through the month of October, showing a shortage of $9,104. Dan is in attendance if you have any questions.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from the committee?
I move that we accept the 2019 Omni Center financials.
Second.
Motion by Dan Stevens, second by Jim Olson to accept the 2019 Omni Center financials. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 5 is the 2019 General Fund financials. Fred, could you give us a summary, please?
Okay, in your packet of information, we have the revenues to date of $8,469,037 compared to the expenditures of $7,458,474. Keep in mind, the expenditures represents a majority of the expenditures, of which is around 83 1/3% used, roughly 16 2/3% left to pay, which is the months of November and December, so we have 2 months to pay bills yet. Nothing out of the ordinary, pretty much what we've talked about before. Really don't have anything more to say.
Thank you, Fred.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 2019 General Fund financials.
Second.
Motion by Dan Stevens, seconded by Jim Olson to approve the 2019 General Fund financials. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 6, approval of the Cooley Region Humane Society Incorporated Animal Control Department Agreement for 2020. The agreement is in our packet. Fred, were there any comments or anything different from previous years?
No, the reason it's coming in at this stage of the game is because I didn't want to have a signed contract until the budget hearing was held. And then once the budget hearing was held, that gave authorization to move forward with an agreement, which has been reviewed by legal counsel.
Okay. And the amount is in line with what was on the budget?
That is
Amount.
exactly,
It's exactly what's in line with it. Okay, thank you. And the city attorney has reviewed.
yes.
Thank you.
I will make a motion that we approve the Cooley Region Humane Society, Inc. Animal Control Department Agreement for 2020.
Second.
Thank you. Motion was by Dan Stevens, seconded by Jim Olson to approve the Cooley Region Humane Society contract for 2020. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 7 is an update regarding a patch for the TIP software conversion. Fred, are you handling this one?
Well, I guess I could, but I know Police Chief Chuck over there would be more than happy because he's more familiar with police department software as it relates to parking. And what I do know that there was a minimum cost to make this happen because As the police chief will tell you, there's a lot of tickets being issued daily. And so the faster we got this patch fixed, the easier it is for all parties involved.
Okay, so perhaps Police Chief Ashbeck could give us a update.
Yes, thank you, Fred. I'm not sure how much the committee is aware of the need for this patch, so I won't go into long history, but essentially, the need was identified to have a program written so that our ticket writing software can talk to the accounting software on the finance end. So we reached out to a local IT service, and they wrote this program, and were able to just get it installed last week, and with finishing touches today with Nils and IT staff, they were able to successfully get it running. So we are thumbs up, and we are rocking and rolling with this. So it's going to be a real time saver for our front office, and they should be very pleased, I think, now that it's working.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
I've just spent the better part of 2 days making sure that the software works with the accounting software, so I totally get it.
Okay, being that was just an update, then we'll move on to item 8. Options regarding the 2020 computer system services. This item, staff is still putting together some recommendations, so we'll advance this directly to council at this time with no action here. Item 9, accept changes to the City on Alaska Finance Manual. The manual is in the packet. Maybe Amanda wants, or Fred wants to highlight any specific changes. I know I went through it, didn't look like any major changes in what is happening, just maybe some clarification, rewording, and then adjusting to changes that have happened. Was there any other changes beyond that?
No, the only thing is there's one correction we would like to make is on page 50 of the number down below, where it says budget timeline. We should have December/January public hearing for capital improvement needs. Sometimes most of the time we try to make it December. Once in a while, it may slide into January. So it gives us a flexibility that could be either December or January.
Okay. Can this change be in place for the council
Absolutely.
packet? Okay.
Okay, so do we want to then refer this for the non-consent or accept this as presented with a contingent change?
That would be at your pleasure. Could go either way.
Jim, would you like to weigh in on this?
On the policy?
He's just afraid to make a motion that nobody will second.
Yeah.
All right,
Unless
so
you-
I'm going to move that we accept the changes to the City of Onalaska Finance Manual with the contingent change suggested by Fred Bueller.
Second.
Okay, motion was made by Dan Stevens, seconded by Jim Olson to accept the changes to the City on Alaska Finance Manual, including the one described by Fred to add December or January as the public hearing date. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, moving on to personnel. Item 10, the moment we've all been waiting for, the monthly department presentation given by the city administrator and the city attorney departments. Drum roll.
I'm not sure if he's graciously letting me go first because he knows he has to leave, or if he just is letting me go first so he doesn't have to. Okay, so the city attorney, just because of the short amount of time I have been here, I didn't want to kind of give you an overview of what I do on a daily basis. That would probably be kind of boring and mundane, but I thought I would just highlight a little bit of what the city attorney role is kind of from a statutory perspective, and then just highlight a couple of things that I think help both you as a council and also the city attorney. And so the city attorney is actually a statutory officer, and so I've just highlighted our ordinance pretty much mirrors state statute as far as what the role of the city attorney is. But it's to conduct the legal business in the city's interested, written legal opinions, draft ordinances. It says bonds. I don't think we've ever, done that, but it's in there. Other instruments, typically like resolutions are a common thing, contracts, things like that. Examine the tax and assessment rule, and help with tax proceedings, and then any other duties provided by law or at the council's pleasure. So those are the statutory rules, and then also in our ordinance. And then on the second page of the presentation, I just kind of highlighted the primary areas of municipal law that the attorney's office deals with kind of on an ongoing basis. So obviously contracts, we review contracts, we draft contracts. That can be anything from like an easement agreement, development agreement, to the Humane Society contract. So kind of the gamut of all different types of contract. We review a lot of zoning and land use things, annexations, rezoning, things like that. Kind of regulating local concerns, which can really be anything from like environmental concerns or just concerns of citizens that, somehow have a legal effect on their life, property maintenance, can be just about anything. I work obviously with Hope very closely at times over any employment issues we have, policies, trainings, things like that. Should we need one, investigations, that would be something that your city attorney would be able to help with. And then risk management, so kind of working with Fred related to any insurance claims, and then just how to best handle the risks of the city. And then municipal prosecution, which is kind of self-explanatory. But going back to the risk management a little bit, I want to highlight that one as you kind of go into the last page as far as ways that you can help protect the city with your attorney. Having been kind of on both the inside and the outside now, one of the things that I want to highlight is that the sooner you get me involved, the better. And so even if something seems like it may not be a big deal or that it's just something that'll happen in passing, it's a lot harder to come in really with any job after the fact and try to help clean stuff up when we could have been proactive in the beginning and maybe done things differently to put the city in a better position. And so feel free to bug me with anything. Worst case scenario, it's something that we have to sit down and talk about. Best case scenario, I tell you it's no big deal, but thanks for telling me. So communication is key, really making sure that you're communicating any concerns you have. If a constituent comes to you or if you have any just general concerns, let me know. I'd be happy to chat with you about them. Also, just a friendly reminder that my client is the city. And sometimes that gets confusing for elected officials as far as, do I represent you in your capacity as an elected official? I don't. I represent the city's interest. And sometimes those are not the same. And then be candid. There's no fact that's not important, so just make sure that if you do have a legal issue, that I'm getting as much information as possible. Also, know that there's not always an answer to everything. Sometimes the law is very gray, sometimes it's not determinable, sometimes, depending on what the facts are, we just can't give you a concrete, yes, I think this is how this is going to turn out. So just know that sometimes I may not actually have an answer for you. And then lastly, just a reminder that the city attorney is a legal advisor and not a policymaker, and so it's important for me that I can be independent and objective in the information that you provide and in talking to you, and so sometimes it's easy to kind of drag the attorney or other department heads into that kind of administrative policy-making decision, but really my job is to give you the most objective answer I can. So, any questions?
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for Amanda?
No, but I'll think of something.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. It's very good. Short and yet informative.
Before I hand these out.
Yes.
And while Amanda's still here, we do joke often, but as city administrator, publicly, it's often been my role to say yes to things, and we share a wall, and she can overhear this, and she jokes a lot that it's often her job to say, tell me no. So it really just kind of speaks to her presentation as to what her role is, that's very much a advisor to the entire city as we move forward.
Thanks, sir.
Over the last several months, had opportunities to hear from every of the department heads speaking about the roles, responsibilities, and accomplishments of the departments. In similar vein to Amanda regarding the city attorney position, I've taken the opportunity not to necessarily list a list of accomplishments for the department, and I do that for a very particular reason, because without trying to take credit away from the department heads, basically the end result is, yeah, what they said. And the reason for that is basically the role as designed by the city council for the city administrator. And so on the first page, I just highlight the city ordinance that creates that. It's an officer of the city pursuant to Wisconsin statutes. It's the chief operating officer of the city. Administrator administrates the city departments to implement the policies set by the council. Underline that one. Responsible for the efficient coordination of all city departments, boards, and commissions, and has authority to coordinate and administer the day-to-day operations of municipal government. It's a bit of a shame that we can't put this up on the TV, as that will knock out our feed for those at home, so unfortunately we'll have to look at this on paper. But I thought the graph on the next page, or the chart on the next page, really kind of helps explain the relationships. First of all, we have the elected officials. The mayor, who is the chief executive officer by statute, and the common council, which is responsible for policy approval. City administrator is then enclosed and reports to the elected officials, if you will, is responsible for the policy analysis and recommendation, has administrative oversight, as I just cited within the ordinance, and acts as the chief operating officer, not executive officer, but operating officer. And then enveloped with that then is the department heads, who are actually then responsible for the departments that provide the public services out to the public. Notice, though, that provision of public services is really enclosed by all. It's not a hierarchy necessarily. We're all responsible for the provision of public services. We all have a different, though, relationship in the provision of those public services. To administer. So 3 different definitions, but all very similar. To manage or control the operation of something, to govern, Cambridge Dictionary. Webster says to manage or direct the affairs of a government, institution, etc. And the Oxford Dictionary says to manage and organize the affairs of a company, an organization, a country, etc. Someday I may wish it was the whole country, but perhaps not this year. But really in Alaska, what's driving the factor here, and you do notice the underlying portion there, the city administrator is to manage, control, direct, and organize the work, as per the definition above, the work of the city departments, underline, towards the strategic vision, goals, and policies of the Common Council. To be clear, the city administrator does not create policy. I have no authority to create policy. That is ultimately the role and responsibility, as the previous page shows, to those that I report to, and that is the Common Council. Lastly, on the last page, no surprise, but really more for the public, the role of administrator in terms of overseeing then the departments to provide the public service, just how varied those roles and responsibilities are. Not just the individuals below, but also as administrator to oversee that. So we have finance department, clerk, as well as fire. I did put in parentheses there to make note that the fire chief is a mayoral direct report. Engineering, IT, cemetery, and public works within the public works department. City attorney, police chief, also a mayor direct report, as as well as Human Resources and Payroll, Parks, Recreation, Aquatic Center, Library, Building Maintenance, Omni Center. Dan, you do a lot, don't you? As well as Planning and Zoning and Inspection oversight. So the role as the administrator and all the list of accomplishments that you've heard throughout the year, those accomplishments are truly the accomplishments of the department heads and of the department. They're the ones that have the technical knowledge and the ability to manage their departments to provide those very important services. All of which, though, somehow has to communicate and follow the policy established by the Common Council, and that is the role of the city administrator there as well, is to be that conduit between those that are providing the services and those that are creating the policies in between. So again, I'm going to forego the list of my personal accomplishments so that we can save that for a evaluation time frame, but really the role of the administrator is, I think, well spelled out here. So any questions?
Are there any questions for the city administrator? Thank you for your very short and informative presentation.
No, he didn't.
Poor Freddie.
Just less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Going back to the agenda, item 11, update from the Human Resources on any police and fire staff vacancies. Hope, do you have any information for us? Tell us the good news.
Yes, our fire department is fully staffed again. We basically hired our last firefighter right before Thanksgiving, and so our last vacancy is filled. And then we also have the firefighter that was out on leave on light duty is back to full duty. So we are back to a full commission of firefighters. We are still down to police officers. We are working on making a contingent offer to one individual and continuing on the background of another individual. But we still have an open process, so we're going to continue to go through that and interview and go through that process. So we're getting there.
Yeah, very good news. Any questions for Hope about that?
We appreciate the updates.
Yeah, right. Yes, good news abounds. Okay, that was for information only. Going on to item 12, review and consideration of expectations for the compensation study for 2020. This is something I had asked to have on the agenda so we could have a discussion, an open discussion, kind of ahead of the game. You know, this is not for next year, but maybe I'll just ask Eric first to kind of share your ideas and thoughts, and I just want to make sure that, you know, everybody has a chance to talk about this openly so that we can have the best possible compensation study completed this year. Eric?
Provided that the consulting firm selected is the one that I've worked with in the past, which is Springstead, now Baker Tilly. I can discuss a little bit about what the process will be and the input that will be necessary from the council as well as the employees. The first step really when the consultant comes in is to kind of identify what are the ultimate needs that we're seeking. You know, competitive wage, a new wage and compensation plan, the chart that we see, the scoring methodology. I think those are all things that I'd be making a recommendation to update and see, but, you know, really the full scope of the work. Once decided, it is with employee input that the process will take place. So each employee will get their job description and be asked to review it to make sure that it is consistent with the tasks and duties that they actually currently do. They'll also be asked to review the position description and make possible changes to that. So not rewrite their own position description, but then really kind of score to see what does the position require, not necessarily what do they themselves bring to the position, but if they were to leave, what kind of person should replace them is really kind of the way you kind of phrase it that way. And so we're really searching and comparing positions to what we have in place and what we would need to have in place going forward is the ultimate intent. Council input will also be then on to the comparables. What kind of comparables are we looking at on a local, regional, state, national level? The kind of communities is not just by population, perhaps, but adjacent to a larger community would be one requirement of them as well. And that's all done prior to them even reviewing the position descriptions and then creating a scoring methodology for that. So it's just the position, and then it's the input that's necessary to how do we compare those positions in place. So it really is, to a large degree, starting with a blank slate. We're not starting with, we use our current position descriptions, but it's not just to adjust the current chart. It is to create a new one based on all fresh information. And so I would say that to the employees that are reviewing this and to the public, but particularly to the employees, your input is vital to the success of the program. And please take that seriously. Timeline will be determined as we approach and try to get a consultant hired and in. But I would anticipate the timeline, because of it's such an in-depth, thorough, and comparative study, probably by midway through the year or the third quarter of the year, but that can be dependent on the desire of the council when we meet with the consultant. Any questions?
Okay. No, thank you.
Does that
That was a
cover?
good overview. Do you guys have any questions or comment? I have several, but would you like to share any of your questions or comments about your vision for the compensation study?
If you want to start, or Jim, if you have anything.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. All right, I'll go first. I mean, I guess one of the things I wanted to discuss was the selection process for the consulting firm. And so, Eric, what were you recommending for that? I just want to make sure, I'm not necessarily of any specific opinion. I just want us to have a discussion about it. We have all the older people here. It's a good chance to make sure we're all on the same page and in agreement how we're moving forward.
As you reviewed it, there's also purchasing and RFP policy that perhaps have to go through. My recommendation is and there may be others that we can engage and see if they have the same end result. But I have worked with what is now Baker Tilly Springstead in the past. The same consultant is interested in working with us, and it's the one that gave us the estimate that we could use for the capital improvements projects. But familiar with how open the process is, familiar with the expectations and the end product, and how to implement the end product. I was very comfortable and confident with that. But more importantly, the position scoring methodology that they use, and they will give to us to utilize going forward, has been tested in labor law courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so one of the first things that if there's ever a wage case or employment case brought in, you don't have to defend the scoring methodology. It's already been defended, if you will. So I am a large fan of that process that I've gone through with it, and it's very efficient. We did get it done in less than a year, so I'm confident that they'll give you great information, usable information, and the plan to go forward. It's not necessarily rule out anybody else that may be interested in doing so, but they're ones I'm most comfortable with the end result.
So Eric, for the city finance plan, what are the requirements regarding hiring this sort of consultant, just to have it in the forefront of the public record and the committee council members?
Fred, do you want to answer that question?
Could you repeat the question?
The question is, what is the city policy for hiring this type of consultant?
In our finance manual, we kind of leave it fairly open, but I think the practice that the city has done is we kind of, and Jared kind of actually talked about that at the Board of Public Works last night, is we kind of evaluate a few vendors, if necessary, bring them in and make the best choice for the city of what your expectations are.
So is there a requirement for an interview process in this case for the specialized services?
I'm not aware of one.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I think, is it appropriate at this time, like, for us to be on the same page if we're going to go through a selection process, or if we're just going to allow the city attorney to select a person? Eric?
I'm a big fan of the process, but I would advocate requiring at least getting proposals from other firms and to see what they'd be interested in doing, and before any selection.
Okay, so that's, I mean, these are the things I want to talk about. Like, you know, what
think
we
we should.
decide, I trust in the committee, whatever it is fine, but I just want to start laying out these things because it's important to me that we can hit the ground running with this, and these are some activities that we could be doing. I mean, I know everyone's schedule is crazy, but even now, I mean, before the start of 2020, we can be looking for potential firms and deciding on what our path is going to be for selecting a firm and getting ready to engage in a contract with them, if you follow me.
Well, would they come and do a presentation, I assume?
Well, that's what we would need to decide, how that was going to be handled. Eric?
Often when it comes to the consultants, like the traffic study for the Circle or other ones, we do an internal, multiple staff, independent review of the materials provided. So it's, you know, the RFP process, we have our requirements, we'll get the materials in. The ADA study, for example, was another one, so not within Public Works. So we do this frequently. We have an open scoring. We record the scores and file them to make sure that the decision was done over board. We could do it internally. The other option then is to do the same thing, but have a committee, keeping in mind that those selections would be in open session.
Yeah, well, but we won't need to do a RFP. We cleared that up with my first question, I thought, right? So we're not doing an RFP, so it wouldn't be the same as that situation.
I would reach out to the consultants that do the work and get proposals.
Well, and just part of my concern with that, like, and as I said, like, I don't have like a preconceived plan, but I just want us to be all doing the same thing. That's why I feel like I'm struggling to get people to open into a discussion. But what I'm concerned about is I want to make sure that when we do this study, like from the very start, that we're very open to making sure that it's very open to people, that lots of people are involved in it, that staff isn't, I don't want it to be, like, this is an exaggeration to make a point, but like, I don't want it to be staff getting in the closet with these people and knocking out a contract, and they're hired and then hand feeding them whatever information they want to have. Like, so that's an extreme example just to point out, you know, what I don't want to have happen. I want this to be a very open process with as many people involved at all the steps of the way so that we can end up with the best final product for our community. So with that in mind, I think I would be more of an advocate of some kind of, even, you know, beginning with the selection of the consultant and all the way through, I'd like to see, you know, a assortment of people from all levels, like a council person, staff people, the people who are affected by this wage study. All input is valuable. Hope, did you have any input? As HR director?
The mayor wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even notice you. Mayor, please.
You called on her before.
Yeah, no.
My arm up, so go ahead. She can go first.
Okay, Hope.
I think in the past, when we've done review of the job descriptions and an analysis, we gave all of the job descriptions to the employees for their review to determine whether or not the tasks that they were on their job descriptions were accurate. And that was partly to get us in ADA compliance the first time, and now physical descriptions are the next thing that we've got to update as well. But I envision this as very similar to that process of having those job descriptions, again, going to the employees, having them review them, that it be a very formal process. But the consultant is, my opinion, going to be working with these individuals to kind of find out, you know, is this accurate? Are there things on here that are not listed on the job description that would potentially considered essential functions, and then taking that data and then bringing it back to, myself, a group of people, whoever those, that's determined, to verify that information. So I think that's always kind of that process of, okay, verifying information and consolidating it, because the job description isn't meant to list everything.
Right.
So I think that's going to be part of the process, and that's how I envision it going, and it's going to be very time-consuming.
Right. Mayor, please.
Okay, well, there's really kind of 3 different ways you can go about it. You can have the council do it all. You can have staff do it all. Or you can have a hybrid committee, of which Hope would have to be the professional
Lead.
because of knowing the laws and regulations, and that could include members of all kinds of different areas. That would then maybe pare down the list to 3 and bring the 3 to the council, the greater council, for their approval. I think there's, that's probably the best way to do it without, creating too much rancor within the body politic.
Excellent point. Eric?
When it does come to the study, though, I do wish to caution, we could have an open process, or we could have an independent process, or some blend in between. I think it's the end goal of what we're seeking. Both end goals are valid, but both end goals may not lead to the same place. If you have a truly independent one versus an open one. The reason I say that an open one is it does allow for the loudest voice to get their way, versus an independent judgment, which then compares the positions after all the input is done. Distills that down to apples versus apples and oranges versus anything else. So if we're looking at hiring consultants and picking the right consultant, I think once that consultant is in, let the process happen is my recommendation.
Sounds reasonable as well. So have you considered it? Okay, Dan?
So I'm hearing a couple different angles, and I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So you're wanting a greater voice in choosing the consultant, or you want to be part of the process in terms of working with staff, council, HR, and the consultant together? I mean, could you clarify your?
Yeah, I don't have a position. I'm just trying to start a discussion so that we openly discuss what we want to do. We're all doing the same thing. If someone had a strong opinion, we heard what it was, and we can move together in unison. I'm just trying to start a discussion. I'm not advocating for any specific thing at all right now. Mayor?
Yes, and just so I make my point clear for you, because I thank you for that, because I did not make that very clear. What I spoke to was just for selection of the consultant only.
So Eric, did you have a specific timeline in mind for getting this started?
The capital budget's been approved and passed, so I can start getting proposals at any time. So, yes, I'll be working on that immediately, but
Dan?
I think my inclination is to, I think Eric used the word, let the process do the work. If people felt strongly that they wanted to be included in the process of choosing the consultant, I don't have any objection, but I would also not have a problem if the person that we've hired to vet the consultants also made that pick. If anybody felt differently, I'm my door's always open, but let's get the best consultant we can and get the project started, is, I guess, where I'm sitting.
So what I'm hearing you say is that Eric and Hope should work together to bring back perhaps a recommendation for how they would like to move forward?
I would have no
Hopefully
objection
at
to
the
that.
next meeting, but understanding time is
Right.
different right now with Christmas and everything. Eric?
I would be surprised if we get more than 3 total proposals in the next month of firms that are truly qualified to do a organization our size. I think we could probably go out there, get proposals, and then sort through them and make a recommendation back as to, here are the 3, what would you like to do? Would you like to select them, or would you have us select them? We can come back with that.
Hope, do you think that will work? Or do you have another idea or any ideas?
No, I think that'll be fine. My struggle is it going to be the FMP meeting? Just because we're getting to end of year in our department and payrolls, and we have multiple payrolls and a lot of things going on at the end of the year. Not to mention, we're trying to get our new time clock system rolled out, and so we're kind of in the midst of that as well. So, not that I don't want to work on it, but I just will do everything
Yeah.
we can to have that ready for FMP for January. But if it's delayed, that would be why.
Well, and I think that, I mean, and that's why I called on you as well. Because I think, if we just have have this as an item now on our FMP schedule going forward, and we can have an update, and if it's just really coming together, and Eric is comfortable and, wants to push it and come forward right away next month, that'll be something good. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
I'm good with that.
Okay, Eric?
We do have one proposal. It's not a contract, it's a proposal, which is what drove the, the capital improvement budget number. And that one particular company could start now or January 1st, because we can't fund until January, correct? I would not expect during the holiday season we'd be able to get 2 to 3 other quality proposals anyway between now and the holiday season. So I think if we're looking at a full review, we're probably into February's F&P cycle at the earliest, before I would even get materials back from people. So-
Okay. That sounds reasonable. Okay, are there there's other council member, do the other council members have any input they'd like to give right now on this topic? Since we won't be discussing it at council, and it'll be an ongoing discussion at this meeting. Tom?
I would just say that I support what Eric has, I've worked with this firm that actually has done this. We've done studies, and they're very, very, and not that there's other ones too, we could look at different ones, but they come up with here's how to do it.
Okay.
And that's what you need. You need someone that's independent, objective, that'll come in and say, this is what we recommend you do based on the size of your organization. I've used them 4 different times, the company that he's done, so I do know that they know their stuff. I can't speak about any other ones, but I think that's the approach, is to finalize who you want, bring them in. They will bring a lot of input to it, because that's what they do.
Right.
And we're not always that smart at that stuff, but they can help us, direct us to get it done in the time frame that we would like. So
Yeah.
that would be my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
I'd be happy to help as an input on it, just because I've had a lot of background in that, so.
We will love to have your input on it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you for the discussion, everyone, for your ideas. Move on then, if everyone's ready, to item 13, review and consideration of out-of-state travel for Colin Radke and John Waite to attend the Water and Wastewater Equipment Treatment and Transport Trade Show, Training and Seminar from February 17th, 2020 through February 20th of 2020 in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Jim Olson.
I feel really bad for saying this because that was a long sentence, but I actually had another question on the rollout study, and we kind of breezed by that. I was letting you finish your line of questioning, and I just didn't want to.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Let's just
Can we go
put
back to
Jim's motion on hold, and we'll go back up to item 12 and have additional input from Dan.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
My apologies.
No problem. There's, After the study is completed, I know that there was some money set aside for the funding of what some of the outcome of the study may be. Eric or Hope, can you talk about how the rollout would be if there needed to be wage adjustments? Is there a time frame that is like kind of mandated, or can we roll that out based on the budget dollars that we have available, or wait, have it start in the next budget year? What are our options?
My experience with the one company, at least, part of working with them is dependent on the results and where you are. If you're, exposure or in your budget constraints, they will help you with the plan to identify the rollout process procedure, which will also then be open and public. This is how we're going to get to where we are.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments about the compensation study? Okay, now we're going to go to item 13, again, considering the out-of-state travel request. Would Jim like to remake his motion? To approve the out-of-state travel request?
Again.
That's my,
Again, can you do it again?
do it again.
Make the motion again, if you want to.
Make a motion to approve the out-of-state travel for Colin Radke and John Wyatt to attend a water and wastewater equipment treatment and transport trade show from February 17th, 2020 through February 20th, 2020 in Indianapolis, Indiana.
I will second that motion.
Okay, motion by Jim Olson, seconded by Dan Stevens. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing then, all those in favor of approving the out-of-state travel for Colin Radke and John Waite to attend the water and wastewater seminar, please say aye. Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 14, review and consideration of out-of-state travel for Wayne Nagy to attend the Fire Inspection Principles 2 from March 6, 2020 through March 14th of 2020 in Emmitsburg, Maryland.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Motion to approve by Jim Olson, seconded by Dan Stevens. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion passes unanimously. Item 15 is review and consideration of changes to the City of Onalaska policies listed below. We'll take them one at a time. Item A is 1.15, the ethical standards policy. Hope, can you give us a recap of what has changed?
Essentially, the only change to this policy is going to be on page 94, or page 2 of the actual policy. The ordinance was changed, and this is basically word for word the same thing as the ordinance, other than the change in the ordinance from $10 to $25. So we're making that same change so that we're consistent in both our policy and our ordinance.
Because that ordinance just changed.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you. It's the pleasure of the committee regarding 1.15 ethical standards policy.
Go ahead.
I'll move that we accept the changes outlined in section 1.15 for the ethical standards policy.
Second.
Okay, motion by Dan Stevens, seconded by Jim Olson to approve the policy. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item B is 3.02, the Fair Labor Standards Act policy. Hope, could you give us a summary?
Yeah, so this is something that I worked on a little bit more in more detail. And really to kind of take the policy and kind of pull things out of it to make it a little bit more clear for people. I think people get confused with what exempt and non-exempt is, and then salary versus non-salaried. And so really wanting to kind of specifically state, here's what those exemptions are. And then Obviously, because they're non-exempt, only those people would be eligible for overtime. Listing out kind of the overtime requirements, there really wasn't a whole lot of changes with that. We did make some changes to the on-call pay where previously it said effective 1/1/2016 utility operators, and we're changing that to public works operators to be in line with the reorganization of the street and utility departments into public works. And then also have an assigned winter operations employee who basically will be monitoring weather patterns so that if we need to call people in for snow removal, that we have an individual that will be on call to do that. So we've added that, and that's something that Jared did budget for in this next year's budget. Then I think just reviewing the policy for holidays and those people that are on call. Obviously, we don't want to not allow them to get overtime if they're working on our behalf on the holidays to come in and take care of things, particularly those, like I said, that are on call, so they do get overtime if they do have to work on those holidays. The call-in, we made some changes, and then I missed a couple things, so I have a couple additions and changes to this. So in the third sentence where it says will not otherwise have to be on duty, in parentheses, I would like this to say this is in addition to actual hours worked, end parentheses. And then the aforesaid call-in provision does not apply, the not should be removed. The intent of this is so that basically we had like a minimum of that they'd have to come in for a full hour and work the full hour, but sometimes I think that can be a little taxing depending on if it's multiple calls in the middle of the night. So that we would just have an incentive to have them come in instead of that full hour of work, give them a half hour of pay. But if they're coming in a couple hours before their immediate shift, that shift starts when they come in. So if it's 4 o'clock in the morning, well, rather than having them leave and come back, we might have their shift start at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they can continue on. And if they have to stay late because of things like snow removal or water main breaks or things like that, inspections, whatever the case may be, those are the things that people are going to be in here doing, and it's because of emergency services. So that's why a couple of those changes are in place. The remaining changes that we have are just to kind of specify overtime utilization and approval processes, and then kind of outline, I think, some of the things, because we are going to a new time clock system, that, eliminating some of the information that talks about paper, all of the things that we are required to have based on federal law, state laws, those kinds of things, is just outlining that and trying to simplify that a little bit. So a majority of the changes are because of those things. The other changes are because looking at how are we going to set up with a time system and kind of keeping track of that and what makes most sense. So we had numerous meetings with the department heads on this. The attorneys looked at it. And I think for the most part, we're all in agreement with the changes in the policy. And like I said, a lot of it is taking it from paper timesheets to electronic. So, woohoo. So, I don't know if you have any questions of Jared or I. I think it affects his department the most, like with the call-in and that kind of thing. But I think overall it impacts all of our employees that are non-exempt.
Nope, thank you, Hope. Jared, did you want to weigh in on that?
Just under the call-in, it is 2 hours, so presently the Public Works Department shift does start at 7 a.m., so that would be anything 5 a.m. or after. And the problem we're having is if you get called in at, say, 5:15 a.m. and you have a half-hour emergency, then we had confusion from staff members. Some would stay in till 7, some would go home because they didn't know. Are we paying them overtime until 7 because they stayed and worked? So this policy better defines that we're going to pay them for the emergency, but then if it would actually start their shift, because there's no sense of sending them home for a half an hour and having them come back, but necessarily we just don't want them sitting in the lunchroom. It's making it more clear for our staff, and we wanted to define a time before a shift. You could make it 3 hours, you could make it 2 hours, you could make it an hour and a half, and talking to staff and going through with Hope, we decided that 2 hours was the number we wanted to use. So that's just one thing. It's kind of going to help us clarify when we have those Not so much snow plowing really, because those are usually long-term events, but usually it's a lot of the utility side on call where you called in for emergencies, so just a clarification.
Sure. Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? All
I
right.
want to thank Hope, worked quite a bit on this with our staff. Really, we tried to work with our staff to get their concerns and questions answered.
Good. And the city attorney as well?
And the city attorney, correct?
Eric had nothing to do with it.
He had no info whatsoever.
We'll make a motion to accept the 3.02 Fair Labor Standard policy.
I will second that.
Motion by Jim Wilson, seconded by Dan Stevens, to accept the changes to 3.02 Fair Labor Standards Act. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 16, discussion and review of timeline and process for administrator annual review. And I was going to have the attorney do a recap of what we had defined the process to be, but they are not here.
Awkwardly, I can do
So
it.
maybe Eric could give us a recap of what the process is going to be.
Timeline first. Unusually, when I was hired, I was on a different schedule than every other employee was for the annual review. Hired in May, the council in 2017, 6 months later, at the end of the year, did an annual review, or did a 6-month review, which qualified with a positive recommendation for the 2018 budget year step. Then in May, my annual review, council met again, and once again, with a successful, or actually it was April, the outgoing council in April then met, did the review, again positive, qualified for the 2019 step. The council in April again here in 2019 met, did the review, if you recall, based on the review, qualified for the 2020 step as well. Then we negotiated and added 2 years to the agreement to replace the first 2 years. Also was agreed at that point in time that we would move the administrator review to this end of the year where all the other employees get the reviews done at the same point in time. Awkwardly, that would put then the next annual review December of 2020 for the 2021 step, which would mean that this sitting council would not have a review as is, which is why I think the question comes up now. So one of the questions I think this council needs to do is kind of identify the overall outcomes of the review. And my personal recommendation is, as the outcome review, is identify the strategic goals we talked about earlier of the council and do two things. One, identify the success of the administrator in achieving those goals, and two, paving the way forward for the next year. So we look at targets to hit for the administrator. I think there's some great value in having that conversation. Procedurally, also then, earlier on in the year, and Hope, you can correct me, because as you're a part of this conversation, please, the ordinance was changed as to the role of the council and the role of individuals in providing the annual review of the administrator. At the time, it was felt that the mayor, who was one of those people responsible for the annual review, who does not exert any oversight over the administrator, would not be an appropriate person to do that review. There's also a concern about the body of 6 voting on a review, if you will, without just adding input. So the ordinance was changed then, and so the council president and the F&P chair, with assistance of the HR director, but not a voting member, just the assistants, actually prepare the annual review with insight only of the common council. No timeline was established in that agreement. It's just as part of an annual review, which again, one was already been done for this particular year. But quite frankly, going a year and a half without our annual review is not fair to anybody, both the people I report to or the employee, in this case myself, without knowing are we achieving goals set out or not. But there was no timeline set out. That timeline really would be up to the council to decide.
Right. Thank you, Eric. And that matches my thinking as well, and it's the reason why I'm pushing for us to bring this forward, because I think that it's important for, it's as Eric said, it's very awkward because he did just have a review in May. And so we are doing one a little more frequently, and that's not anything to do with any perceived performance. It's to do with like just getting on a regular schedule, and it's important to do that. I think as this year comes to a close, so that the people that were on council for this past year have an opportunity to give input, for things that are going on, and then also to set up goals for the next oncoming year, in order to help align the goals of the council with the city administrator. And so that being said, did anyone else want to comment? Did you have something you wanted to say, Dan? You look like you're ready.
No, I was listening to your recap.
Okay, that was my recap. And then as Eric said, we had decided that it would be, we were just trying to pick two likely candidates from council to narrow it down so we didn't have such a large group, but that the FMP chair and the council president would be actually doing the review process, of course, with input from all of the council. So I guess with that being said, maybe we should go to Hope, like logistically, what should we do next? Because I think you had that paperwork laid out, correct?
Yeah, I know I had given Diane all of that information earlier, kind of forgetting that he'd already had his review in May. And so I think if you're looking at doing anything at this point, I think it would be to review the goals that were set, establish new goals, and then do the performance evaluation at the end of 2020, so that he gets on the normal schedule like the rest of the staff. So I think that would make sense for this group, because looking at goals, our goals we always are looking at every year for all of our staff. And so I think that would make more sense to just review those goals rather than doing a full evaluation, and then at least give the administrator guidance on where he needs to go.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Is there any other input or question, or suggestions, ideas? Okay, so is everyone okay then with Diane, the council president, who is Diane, getting together the information as to the goals and starting the process to just review the goals and not do a review the progress on the previous goals and then forecast 2020 goals, but not do a full performance evaluation? Is that what I'm hearing?
Just for clarification, so the, I don't have a problem with that in theory, but when you're getting guidance or input from other council members, what does that look like? This is my first time through this process, so I'm not.
I'm going to defer back to Hope, because I'm not sure either. Well, for one thing, I only did it last time, and I'm not sure what happened. And we tried to make it more clear for this time, so that's why I wanted to have this as an open discussion item here.
Yeah, and I think the challenges that we had in the past where we asked each of the council members to come up with goals for the city administrator, or at least have a conversation with the city administrator and what they think, the goals should be for the city, and then to make those goals so that they're defined. So they're not just these vague, goals, but very specific. And I forgot to bring them in with me today, but I think the process probably should be somewhat similar, is everybody kind of comes up with their own list of goals and then narrows it down to, well, what's realistic, what's not realistic, to really come and narrow that down to, I think, realistic goals, because I don't think we should have 50 goals out there. That's not realistic. You probably want to narrow that down to 2 or 3 main goals, and then looking at what strategically he should be looking at for the next how many years.
So would it be, just kind of taking that one step further, so would it be realistic and possible as our guide through this process, Hope, because we would like it to be, somewhat comparable to what other department heads perhaps go through. Would it be possible to have you put together a memo to the Common Council members that has the identified goals, current goals, and then, I don't know, I'll ask Diane, can you think of other information that should be in there?
Kim?
Yes.
So in the review, having the council president and F&P chair work with Hope, I, again, don't have a problem with that, but for the council guidance, I mean, would that not be an appropriate thing to put on a closed session for common council meeting that
Well,
we can all talk about then? I mean,
Well, I think that-
where is the guidance coming from other councils? What's our vehicle to parlay that?
I guess that how, and this is exactly why we redid the ordinance, because of these same kind of questions, like we were just trying to be clear. And I'm not 100%, but my understanding was that, or the way I was envisioning it, is like, for example, you would receive, like, do you even know what Eric's goals are right now? I can't list off what they are. I don't, I maybe have a vague idea, but, like, refresh our mind, what were the goals again? Hopefully Eric knows. Maybe Eric needs to, but so.
Like I hit them all.
Like refresh our mind, get into, and then have each council member submit input to Diane and I, who would be kind of like the head people to, because somebody has to organize the information, and then have a closed session where we discuss what we came to get. Hope?
And because they're goals and they're generic goals, it's not like
Yeah.
you're doing a performance
Yeah, it's not really been
evaluation. It's
close.
not-
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know
true.
that it's going to qualify for closed session because I
Right.
believe we did this last time in open.
Right.
And
yeah.
so that's my only concern is I think if there's closed session, then that's really to talk about performance.
Right,
The
exactly.
goals really aren't
Yep.
necessarily performance, but just what is the
Right.
expectation of the council? And I think it's reasonable to do that in open
But,
session.
well, and I think the trouble why it comes in is because the council needs to have a conduit, a way to have these conversations without creating a quorum or a walking quorum. Like, we need to have a regimented way that we're going to communicate with each other in an orderly fashion and come to some sort of a concise direction. And I think that's why we were kind of trying to get two people to gather up input from everybody.
You can have a closed session with the common council over this issue.
We wouldn't,
Perfectly acceptable. 19.85 will allow you to speak about anything you want to speak to in closed session.
but we wouldn't,
There are no minutes taken or anything, so.
we wouldn't be evaluating his performance, though. We would just be evaluating what we want him to do. We wouldn't be saying he was doing a bad job of it or an excellent job of it. It would probably be an excellent job, but Eric?
Hope so. I guess if we're calling it an annual review, then there is the section 2.3.14 sub G. There's a process that's spelled out there, which spells out the annual review performance and the steps and who's doing it and the month that it takes in review. And to Jim's point, I think annual review that historically has been done in closed session. The person that you're reviewing can request to have it in open session, but can't force themselves to be a part of that closed session. So that could be done in closed. If it is a council administrator goal setting, that I believe would have to be an open session. As Kim, you pointed out, if we're not reviewing the administrator position as to the success of meeting the goals or the value of the goals, then I think that would be an agenda item in open session to talk amongst the whole body, then quite frankly, to establish the goals.
Right, so that's
I
kind
think
of,
we're kind of confusing the two. If we're having
Right.
just the two.
We need to decide.
Review me, that's the proper process. If the two are creating goals, that I would be concerned that you have a walking quorum when the council is establishing, its own work.
right.
I think try to separate the two from, it's a review, it can be a review, which we can talk about goals, and then there's a process there, or let's just have a process, let's just have a open meeting and we'll talk about council goals and how the administrator can assist the council in achieving those goals.
So perhaps we have two different decisions to make then, just to kind of narrow it down here and get us moving forward. So we need to, one, decide, are we going to do a full evaluation, or are we just going to evaluate the goals and redefine goals for the upcoming year? I mean, as a council, we would need to decide between those two. And then once we've decided that, then we need to have a timeline of, and list of activities that we're going to complete to accomplish whatever we've decided to do. And I just want to have us decide what we're going to do and how we're going to move forward.
Should this be a decision for the full council?
Well, maybe that's what we'll have to do. So if we move it to council and have it say timeline and process for city administrator annual review, we can discuss, and that'll give us another, I'd like to consult with the city attorney as well, for input. So maybe that will give us all, we've had a little bit of a discussion now, so we kind of know where our pluses and minuses are lining up, and it'll give us a little bit of time to formulate a stronger, more definitive plan coming forward into council. And then we can make a recommendation there for how to move forward. If everyone agrees with that, I would say then we would move this item to council without a recommendation. Would be the correct form.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, so I move that we advance the discussion and review of the timeline and process for the administrator annual review, advances to city council with, or common council without a recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Kim Smith, seconded by Dan Stevens. Is there any other discussion?
We need second?
I made the motion, Dan seconded it. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. And thank you, everyone, for your comments. Appreciate it. 19, update on the Lexipol policy process. Welcome, Chief Ashbeck, to the podium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my staff and I have been working on the Lexipol policy updates, and through that process, I think Carrie brought to our attention that, was it a resolution that was passed earlier this year or last year? I'm sorry, I wasn't here.
Beginning of this year.
Okay, that an update would be brought to the committee or council about the progress. And so essentially, I just wanted to bring forward where we're at with that. And the assistant chief and the city attorney and I have sat through several meetings with this company, Lexipol, and have decided to reset our policy manual based on I guess how it was done in the previous, earlier this year with the former employee that was in charge of this. I don't want to speak negatively, but essentially it was a train wreck and was not well received by staff. And so we've identified ways of implementing this in a much smoother, much more input process with our staff. We have a policy committee that we've put together. Our first meeting is tomorrow to start this and get input from various staff members and brought out through the rest of the department as we move forward. As compared to prior, these policies were put out with little to no input from any staff, and that's why it was not well received at all. So staff and I feel like we have a good plan moving forward. With this, we are encouraged by this Lexipol company and are starting to feel more comfortable with it the more we've sat through their training sessions. So I guess it's going to be a long process. As you can imagine, I think we have over 170 policies, and so it will take time. Even just, we meet every other week on Thursdays, and you know, if we can review 5 policies, that will still take many weeks to get through all those policies. But it is important work, and so that's essentially the update I wanted to bring you, that we are making some progress, but it's been slow going, and but we're going to do it right this time, so I can assure you that.
Thank you, we appreciate that. Were there any other comments or questions from the committee? No? Okay, thank you for your dedication to that, we appreciate it. Okay, item 18 is closed session. To consider a motion to convene in closed session under section 19.85, paragraph 1, paragraph G of the Wisconsin statutes for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, specifically IAFF, International Association of Firefighters, Local 127, Grievance 2019-3, concerning part-time emergency medical technicians, EMTs, IAFF, International Association of Firefighters, Local 127, prohibited practice complaint, RE, part-time emergency medical technicians, EMTs. If any action is required in open session as a result of the closed session, the committee will reconvene in open session to take the necessary action and/or continue on with the printed agenda.
Motion to go into closed?
Second.
Motion by Jim Olson, seconded by Dan Stevens. Vote is by roll call. Jim Olson.
Aye.
Dan Stevens.
Aye.
Kim Smith, aye. We are in closed session. The time is 8:40. We'll have a moment before we begin